So yeah, I wanted to be an industrial designer when I was a kid. I think Rowan's stories were really cool. I think the industrial design being the original design thinking and the divergent and convergent process, the double diamond. I don't know how many people know, but that actually came out of the British Design Council, who were industrial designers, and really set the foundation for a lot of what we do today in digital. So I want to spend about the next 30 minutes walking you through these three different mindsets. And I've been trying to make sense of these for most of my career. I think back to when I first started working, and I really believed that if we just get the design right, everything's going to be okay. And I worked with some amazing designers in some great design teams, and we designed some awesome stuff. But some of those products failed, and it made me reflect that actually good design's not enough. You need to have a good strategy as well. And so I spent a bunch of years trying to figure out the difference between bad strategy and good strategy, and got more proficient at that. And then I was involved in some projects that had the right strategy and an awesome design, and they still failed. And it was because the culture inside the organization maybe wasn't quite right, and so there were some problems to solve there too. And I spent the last amount of time really exploring that and trying to figure out how to bring all of these things together. I'm going to move pretty quick. If you're the sort of person who likes to take notes, these slides are available on SlideShare. And I'll be around to have a chat and happy to answer questions whenever you like. So let's get into it. So design thinking. People think that this is what design thinking is. They think about the infinite loop, the Venn diagram, the hexagons, the other models that have become popular in describing sometimes what design thinking looks like. But I really think that it's not just about process. I like thinking about how Donald Norman describes design thinking. He actually created the term user experience back in the 90s when he was working at Apple. And I love this description. I like it because he's talking about determining the real problem and searching for solutions, considering lots of options before moving forward with the one that you've chosen. And for me, this kind of summarizes a discontentment with the first idea. It's acknowledging that often our first idea is not our best idea. I know that's definitely true for me. In fact, most of my ideas aren't particularly good. And so I'm lucky to get to work with people that are really great in the ideation space. And then meet Carissa Carter. So Carissa Carter heads up teaching at Stanford's Design School. They're probably responsible for the most popular design thinking visual model, the hexagons, which sort of run us through starting with empathy and looking at prototyping and ideation and through to testing. And I love this. She's sort of blowing up their own process. She's saying that was great at a point in time and it helped people to understand sometimes what it looks like, but people have interpreted it as process and it's really not about that. She goes on to say, this is really what design is all about. It's about an ability. And some of those processes and visual models help us to practice, which is how we build our capability and abilities in design. But these are the core skills that great designers have. And she's talking about things like being able to navigate ambiguity and synthesize meaning from things that are complicated or complex. And I think of it a little bit like, she uses a great metaphor of cooking. And I think that's a little bit what the ability of becoming a great designer is like. Like if you think back to when you first started cooking, you probably followed the instructions quite precisely at the beginning. And then maybe over time, you got a little more comfortable and started to create your own versions of recipes and your own flavors until eventually you didn't need a recipe anymore. And you're able to sort of create your own dishes and your own flavors from that ability. Until you get smashed in the face with a big dose of Dunning-Kruger effect and go on MasterChef and have a breakdown because Matt Preston doesn't like your risotto. I'm not sure what it is about the risotto, but it seems to always be a rice-based dish that unsticks the contestants. So now let's have a little look at the principles of each of these mindsets and how they're similar and how they're different. So there's so many different versions of lean, isn't there? People talk about lean startup, lean Six Sigma, lean enterprise, lean UX, lean analytics, lean product development. And it gets really confusing what this is all about and where it comes from. But if we look back in history, it's actually about a response to scientific management. So scientific management is all about control and predicting things. It's about breaking work down into small chunks, estimating how long it's going to take, and managing that work to completion. If you've worked in a team that has a Gantt chart, you've participated in a type of scientific management. And what we know is that people don't enjoy working that way. People don't like being dictated to on how they're going to solve the problem. And there was a trade unionism movement a long time ago against scientific management because people felt like it was de-skilling labour, it was making their jobs meaningless, and they wanted something better in the way that they worked. And Lean was really about that. It's a way of managing, a different way of managing work that is a more effective way of using people to achieve a thing. And if you want to take a step further back into history, these would be the books to read. The author of Lean, Taiichi Ohno, who created the Toyota production system coming out of manufacturing. The book in the middle is the first author to bring that to a Western audience for managing in organisations. And I like thinking about this similarity between manufacturing, which is the origins of Lean, being what I describe as a system of work. So people coming together to do things to produce some value, in this case manufacturing automobiles. But that's true of any organisation. They're all systems of work and we can apply some of that thinking. And then Lean Enterprise, my friends Joe, Jays and Barry, bringing some of those ideas to software development in modern organisations. So what about the principles? This idea of managing flow and optimising value. So this is where people talk about eliminating waste. And it's the Six Sigma stuff. You could look up 7 deadly wastes. You could look at the theory of constraints, ideas like this. And those are important things, looking at how queues work and how to optimise flow of value through a system of work. This is sort of manufacturing thinking is behind some of these ideas. And quality, so moving beyond just doing quality at the end and building it into the processes and the way that you work all along the way. And this is Edward Deming and a lot of the sort of total quality manufacturing that he talks about. There's learning and adapting, which I think is really what people often miss in Lean. People often focus on the first 2 parts, and that's often where the conversation stops. But Lean has so much to offer in the way that we explore uncertainty and the way that we and the way that we learn through action, through doing things and testing our ideas and refining our strategy as we go. And that's not just for startups either. This isn't just about pivoting. It's about how we make decisions. It's about how we analyze a problem, and it's about how we move forward. Empowered people, I think this is really important. So how do we make the most of people inside organisations so that they can do their best work? And I think Dan Pink is a great author on this. His conversations about motivation and what brings people to work and how to get the most of them. I'm really fascinated by one particular factory in Germany, which people think is a bit weird. It's the pencil factory, Faber-Castell, which I think is really boring for people, but I find it fascinating. Like, how do they get the little graphites inside the wood and how do they make the shapes and so on? And one of the senior managers there summed it up really nicely. He said, the more that you give people a say, the more they help the company to win. And it's this idea of, instead of trying to control and command people's work to a schedule, how about we enable them to achieve an outcome that we're all agreed on and see what happens when we do that. And I think that underpins this idea coming out of Lean. Importantly, to do that, we really need to have more of a focus on outcomes as opposed to the outputs. So modern project management says we've got the triangle of constraints: time, cost, and scope. And we spin up a team and we try to deliver a bunch of features. What it doesn't always look at is, did those features that we delivered achieve the thing that we wanted to? Was it good for a customer? Did it do something for our organisation? And how can we bring that further back to a focus on outcomes? So when we break that down a little bit, this is what projects look like. And perhaps a better way to think about things is the product mindset. How can we be value-driven? How can we have an adaptive strategy as opposed to a predictive one? How can we, instead of having a team that starts and finishes and a project that starts and ends, how can we invest in stable teams that are continuously delivering value? And I also like this last one, this idea that in projects we predict benefits and then we measure it later. It's ROI. In products, we say, let's see evidence of a good outcome and keep investing in that and not invest in others. So it's a more evidence-based approach. All right, so that's Lean in a nutshell. Now let's have a look at Agile. And these will probably be more familiar for people. Tends to be of more conversation in recent years, particularly for software development teams. So it's the stuff you know: interactions and people over processes and tools. It's working software over doing the documentation, collaboration. But really, I think it's this: our ability to respond to change over and above following a plan. and what that means for how we build software. If we acknowledge that today's solution is probably going to be different to the one that we have tomorrow, how do we build with that in mind, and how do we do that in a smart way? This confuses people. Lean and Agile sound kind of similar, don't they? So let's just have a quick look at it. Lean's about systems of work. It's about how organizations are structured, how they do work, how value flows through an organization, and some of the conditions that come out of Lean, like repeatability in manufacturing, where Agile is how we respond to change with software. And there's some different ways that we think about prioritization and trying to focus in on the things that we're going to invest in. These are all mindsets. Design thinking, Lean, and Agile. I like to think of them as a way of thinking more than a set of practices or a set of tools. And the challenge is trying to bring these together in a meaningful way. So this is how I think they fit together. I think that design thinking is incredible at helping us to explore a problem and look at how we might solve those. Lean's our framework for testing our beliefs and learning our way to the right outcomes. And Agile is how we respond to change through software. And so software development teams today are trying to bring these different ideas together in a coherent and collaborative way. And that's what I want to talk about next. It's some of the things that we've learned from trying to achieve some of this. It's kind of like the theory lesson. Now let's talk about what it looks like in practice, some of the challenges and some of the things that really help. So I believe they're about this. It's about ability, it's about learning, and it's about adapting, more than processes and tools and techniques. There's lots of methods in the book. This is a free publication. I think you all have a copy. I think it's in the swag bag. This breaks down the why, what, and how. It's probably got 40 or so different methods across 5 or 6 different themes for product development teams. And so you can check that out later. I want to talk, though, about some of the key ideas. So this idea of purpose, alignment, and autonomy, we touched a little bit on Dan Pink just a second ago. I like how Jeff Bezos is framing this. He makes it sound really easy. He makes it kind of sound like you just kind of like point your finger in a direction and then spin up a team and let them go, right? I've never had an experience like that. There's always more to it than that. And I think one of the things that really helps is when we think about purpose as something that starts with customers. And it's so easy to get that wrong. I think about 2 ways that this commonly goes wrong. So if you're working in an Agile team, you've probably got a card on your wall somewhere that says something like, as a customer, I want to log in so that I can something. For me, that's always felt a little bit weird because I think, I'm a customer and certainly an outcome for me is not logging in. Like logging in is not my favorite thing to do. It's usually a barrier, actually. It's something that gets in the way of me trying to achieve something that I want to achieve. And so a weird way, I think, to talk about value in that kind of contrived way. Another perhaps more common one is how organizations talk about purpose. And I think about the impact that can have when you switch it around a little bit. So if you're a bank, your strategy might be about selling more mortgages. And I think about that as a mortgage owner or as a mortgage holder. And I think that's not the outcome that, that doesn't delight me. I'm not delighted to have a huge mortgage. Actually, the outcome for me is about being in a home. And so if you're in a bank and your strategy is all about sell more mortgages, the things that your strategy is probably going to be made up of things like how can we cross-sell different products to our existing customers? How can we reach new customers with a sales message about the things that we sell and so on, right? But if you shift your conversation about value to be how do we get more people into homes, then how does that change things? Perhaps you're having a conversation about what can we do to help with financial literacy, maybe with young people that aren't even customers yet. What could we be doing in the community that helps people achieve their aspirations to get into a home that has nothing to do with having a loan with your organisation? So when we shift the way that we start talking about value, it's important to be able to help teams to align to it. And I think that visual management is a pretty simple way to try and achieve that. And this is one example. So what we're trying to do in this wall is communicate the purpose and vision for what we're trying to achieve. And it starts with the customer right at the top. So what is the aspiration that we're trying to achieve for our customers? We've got some streams of work. What are all the different opportunities and options that we have for delivering that? And then what are we able to measure out of the things that we're doing so that we know if that's working or not? And this can be a useful artifact for a team to get around to get on the same page about why we're coming to work and what we're trying to achieve. And then I start to think about how you translate that into action. This is the Rim of the Pacific activity. This happens every 2 years. I think it's 22 nations across the world that come together around the Pacific Ocean. And what they're doing is that they are practicing for being able to respond to unexpected circumstances in a time of warfare. And I think this is how purpose-led autonomous teams operate too. The military would call this, they call it disciplined initiative, and it's how they practice the movements for combat is how they talk about it. But I think that we can apply that thinking in product teams also. So this is from Mike Rother. You may have seen this before. Mike Rother is probably one of the leading authors in lean thinking over the last decade or so. And he authored the Improvement Charter, which is a 4-step way of changing the way that you think about stuff. And Mike calls this deliberate practice as opposed to disciplined initiative. And he talks about it as helping us to practice the movements of scientific thinking. And it's really pretty simple. It starts with setting a challenge for what you want to achieve in some future time frame, understanding where you're at today, setting the next smaller step toward your target state, and then trying some things to see what works and what doesn't, and using what you learn to define how you think about the next decision and the next step that you're going to take. So if you're going to work in this way, we really need ways of measuring things well, and that's really hard too. So Douglas Hubbard, he invented the applied information economics. He's one of the leading thinkers in how to measure things well in decision sciences, which sounds super boring, but it's a really interesting field of trying to understand how can we figure out the things that are going to help us make decisions, and that's what he's talking about here. What I know is that it's not trivial to find the right metrics, but what I do know is that when we measure the wrong things, really awful things happen. So let me tell you a story about working with a contact center in a large organization. And we were listening into calls to try and understand what was going on and what the customer experience was like and what our opportunities to improve it were. And I sat with this agent and he spent 45 minutes with this customer and did an amazing job of solving the problem. And toward the end of the call, the agent sort of went back to the script a little bit and he said, "Is there something else that I can help you with?" And the customer was like, "Yeah, there's this other thing that's a bit separate, but if you can help me solve it, that would be really great." And the agent said, "Of course I can. First, I'm going to hang up. You're going to get a small survey, 3 questions. Please fill them out. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to call you back once you're finished with the survey. Then I'm going to transfer you somewhere else, and a different agent's going to help you with that second problem." And I'm thinking, like, why did that happen? That seems like a strange way to sort of meet a customer's need. And in talking with him afterward, I found out that the reason that he behaved that way is because he was being measured on 3 things that day. He was being measured on first-time resolutions, so did the customer's problem get solved on the first call? He was getting measured on customer satisfaction, so how did the survey go? And he was getting measured on average call handling time. How long did the call take? And he knew his fear was that if he transferred the call, he was going to lose his metric on first-time resolutions. He also feared that if the other agent screwed up the call in some way, that the survey would reflect that and that wouldn't be a good thing. And he knew that ending the call at 45 minutes wasn't a bad thing for average handling time. So we've got 3 metrics that were intended to improve a customer experience, but they've done the exact opposite. And it's because we were measuring the wrong things. So let's take another example, one that's a little bit more closer to the work, I suppose. Imagine you're a large e-commerce retailer and you're selling tens of thousands of products from a few dollars through to several $1,000s, and you've got millions of customers. This is probably going to be one of your goals. You want customers to be able to easily find what they're looking for. And when teams think about how they would measure that, I think these are pretty common ways to approach it. But there are issues with each of these. Customer delight, it's an incredible aspiration. It's really hard to measure. I'd love to talk with anybody, I'm not being facetious, I'd love to talk with anybody who's found a great way to measure customer delight. It's really hard. NPR, we see this all the time. It's a great metric. Very hard to attribute to a specific thing that you've achieved. Maybe something changed in the market that blew up your NPS score, and how do you know whether it was that or the feature that you delivered? And then we're back to the build factory, the problem with focusing on output instead of customer outcomes. So we might know that we've delivered the features, but has it made an impact? So how do we start to think about that better? We think about, why do we measure things? Like, we measure things to help us make decisions. So now we start to look at these, and we can start to see that, knowing that converting 3% more people from a result list page to a product purchase or a product detail page, that does tell you something that helps you make a decision. You can now ask yourself, is that enough? Can we invest our time and effort into something else, or do we need to keep going? So starting to think about measuring the things that are going to help to make decisions about what to do next. I love what Jason Fox is saying here. He's basically saying, don't look for answers, ask better questions. So here's a guy who uses, I think he has a PhD in game theory, and he likes to apply that to leadership and strategy in modern companies. And I think this is really important because what I know is that I'm full of biases, and I think we all are in the way that we think about stuff. So I wonder how many people this comic strip will resonate with. This definitely resonates with me. This was me just recently trying to buy an unreasonably expensive pram for our first child. And I knew which one I wanted, but I needed to feel more comfortable about it. So what did I do? I went to the internet looking for reviews, and I found literally the first one that said, this is the best pram in the world. And I was like, where's my credit card? How can I pay for this? Like, and that's just one example, right, of the biases that we have. And actually, if you follow this link at the bottom, you'll see, I think, hundreds of biases. And I find that really crippling. How will I ever make a good decision again when I have to compete with my own mind, which is undermining me at every step? So I'm always looking for ways to help move through that in an easier way. And this works for me. So just defining and writing down what my assumptions and beliefs are, usually in the context of trying to design a solution to a customer problem with a product or service. Deciding what it is that I need to learn in order to move forward, and then designing the experiment that is going to help deliver the learning we need so that we can do that. Because I'm a consultant, I love 2x2 models. So this is my 2x2 model that unpacks that a little bit. It helps us to ask, what's the problem? What is the customer problem? How are we solving it? What assumptions have we made in our solution? And how can we test those assumptions? And again, just a really easy way to have a different conversation. I find this to be the most useful thing for having a different conversation with the stakeholder who turns up to stand up on a Wednesday and said, I had an amazing idea in the shower this morning. We have to build it. How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? And this helps me just to think about that and go, awesome, that sounds like an amazing solution. Just help me understand the problem a little bit. Excellent. What assumptions have we made in that solution? What's the smallest thing we can do to test it? And that doesn't have to take a long time. Research doesn't need to be months. We can do it in days or weeks. Here's us applying the cadence of that 4x4 model over the space of a week. So Monday, all about understanding the problem. Tuesday, what do we need to learn? Wednesday, what experiment can we run? Thursday, get out of the building, talk to customers. Friday, what have we learned? What do we need to do next? We did this once for 6 weeks in a row. Probably wouldn't recommend that. I was having a conversation with Jake Knapp at Mind the Product. He created Google Design Sprints, and I was complaining to him, like, hey, I really like Google Design Sprints, but it's really hard work when you do it for 6 weeks in a row. And he goes, yeah, they're called sprints for a reason. You're not supposed to do it every week. And I think he was spot on. We were exhausted at the end of this. Part of the reason that we were exhausted is that every single Friday we got the pleasure of turning up to our stakeholder group and saying, their ideas didn't work out. Customers didn't like it. Think of something else. We were exploring a different solution to a different problem for a different set of customers every single week. So while that was really hard for us, there was enormous value in that for the team because it helped the team to decide what to invest in and most importantly, what not to invest in. And it helped with the decision making of what was worthwhile and what they would do next. So we've also got to think a little bit about how we're going to do experimentation. Because no one experiment or one way of working is able to address all of the needs that we need to get right when we talk about successful products. So I think that broadly there are 3 categories of learning when we're doing products. The first one's a problem. So how can we validate that this is a real problem for customers? And I think this is all about customer research and qualitative inquiry, maybe observation, cultural probes, empathy, all those good things, understanding what's going on from a customer point of view. And there's things that we can do to evaluate our solution to that problem. And this is the stuff that we're all probably the best at. It's prototypes. It's sketching or doing interactive prototypes and getting it in front of a customer and understanding how well that solution solves that problem. But the one that I think we miss often is this one. It's the customer demand. Is there a market? So those first 2, solution and problem, that's problem, solution, fit. But is there a market, and are they willing to pay in the way that we thought they would, and can we reach them? And that's the product market fit. The reason why I think there are these categories of learning is because I've gotten this wrong so many times. This is one example. Let me tell you about one example of getting this pretty wrong. So we were working with an organisation in Europe who were brokering tax-free refunds. So if you've ever gone to the UK and bought something and claimed your VAT back in the airport, you've probably dealt with one of these companies. And you can probably imagine how painful that customer experience can be. So you've got people that are in an unfamiliar environment in the airport, they've got limited time before they catch their flight, they've got to fill out a paper-based form, sometimes in a foreign language, and if they get it wrong, they don't get their money back. So the stakes are pretty high, and we were trying to redesign that customer experience using a digital tool to help make that smoother for people. And here's how we're thinking about it. You know, you can see there's a fair few things going on here. We've got different levels of prototypes. We've got customer-informed hypotheses. We've been out and been pretty thoughtful about the things that we were measuring. We're also feeling pretty smug that at this particular point in time, there was a lot of discussion about hypothesis-driven development, but not a lot of teams were actually doing it, and this is us trying to do it. And at the end of the day, we designed a really awesome product. It really was a great experience. We released it into market, and nobody used it ever. And it made us reflect, like, what did we get wrong? How did this happen? We were so thoughtful about how we moved things forward. So we started to think about, were we learning the right things? And I started to think about startup metrics. You may have seen this before. Trying to move customers from acquisition to revenue and the things that happen in between. So first contact, how do you activate? How do you move that first contact into an activated customer? How do you turn them into somebody that's generating revenue? Are they going to come back? What are the metrics that help us know whether we're doing that or we're not doing that? And what we realized is that our hypothesis, we thought, was about acquisition. We thought we were looking at this first part of the model, but actually we were optimizing for activation. We were focusing our time on designing the best possible product we could to get those customers into revenue-generating customers. And it's not that that time was wasted because we had an incredible product, but what it meant was we needed to do other kinds of learning in market demand. So maybe those were things like, could we do pre-orders, or could we do a marketing activity to see how many customers are out there that we could reach? And it's not until you address all of those three things, the problem, the solution, and the demand, that we can be successful in digital products and services. So this idea of embracing failure is hard for people to swallow. I don't like failing. I'm not sure if any other people do. It's usually an awful experience, one that I usually take pretty personally and often beat myself up about. I think it's more useful to talk about embracing learning and getting comfortable with uncertainty. And that's really hard for people. Often people who own the ideas, maybe the executive team inside the organization, have a really difficult time coming to terms with the idea that maybe their idea isn't the best idea. And we need ways to change the culture of how that works. What's worked really well for us, when you think about this picture, often the way that story goes is that you have a design team who explores a problem and tries to find a solution for it, and they come back and play it back. And like I was explaining before, to that executive group and saying the idea didn't work out, customers didn't like it. Usually the response is something like, you must have been talking to the wrong customer. Bring me someone else. Or you've obviously gotten something wrong in the prototype because it's certainly not my idea. This is going to work. Just design it better. And so again, looking for ways to solve for that. And I think this was a good example. So this set of hands on the left, this is the global head of strategy for one of the largest airlines in the world. This guy that's going like this, he's the head of innovation. And that sketch on the table isn't from the design team, it's from these two chaps. And instead of trying to do all of the design work and sort of own that and bring it back and help that team to win, we felt that the best way to explore many different ideas and see which ones were more solid than others was to teach our stakeholders how to have a conversation with customers. These gentlemen had never spoken to a customer. They were 20, 30-year veterans of industry, incredibly intelligent people, some of the smartest people I've ever worked with, obviously savvy, surviving in an industry like that for so long and leading it. But they'd never spoken to a customer. And just by helping them to understand what it is that they're trying to learn, how to sketch out their idea and how to have a meaningful conversation with customers, they were able to hear the feedback straight from the customer's mouth. And it was ultimately the only way that we were able to move things from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of this innovation board. This was a portfolio of ideas we were exploring, 12 or 14 ideas. And we had a lot of trouble deciding what not to do because everybody fell in love with their ideas and everybody believed that they were great. It wasn't until we brought the customers to the stakeholders and they were able to see actually some of the holes and flaws in their thinking that we were able to say, we need to pivot this idea, or we need to just put this one to bed. And actually the ones we want to double down on and persevere are the ones that we're seeing good signals from customers. And I think teams really struggle with this idea that there isn't a single truth. There's no one right way. And I see this in teams all the time. People come at things from a different angle and they make different meaning from things. So a good way to explain this is take a look at this picture. Somebody's sitting outside. It's not very much going on. It's probably not that interesting. But if you step back just a little bit, now it's, there's something else going on. We've got a group of friends. They're at a waterway. Somebody's been on the push bike. Maybe they're having lunch, they're having a good conversation. But then when you zoom right out, the meaning of this picture has completely changed. And it's because of the distance of the camera to the action. And I think that metaphor holds true for organizations too. When you think about when you're trying to achieve something for a customer, what are all of the things that happen in between, and how close are you to your version of the truth? And how is that different to somebody else's? And how can you bring all that together to succeed? So this is one way to do that. I know that we had the service design workshop earlier this morning, and this is a group of executives from all sides of an organization coming together in one room, looking at their as-is ecosystem of their business. So what are all of the customer touch points? What's the experience from end to end? Then below the waterline, what are the business processes and the technology systems that are enabling those experiences? What are all the ways that it's broken? What are the ways that we can think of together that we might be able to solve some of that? That's not just design or just business process improvement or just technology, but looking at it as a whole and trying to find ways to improve things. And so trying to get that collaboration across different mindsets and different people coming at things from a different perspective becomes really important. Jeff Patton, for many years, has been talking about dual track development. Don't get too caught up on the crazy spiraling loops. It's not about the process. Really what Jeff is talking about in dual track is that product discovery and product delivery are not mutually exclusive activities. And always looking for ways for people that are doing the execution of a product to be involved in the discovery of the right product. And one of the reasons that I think that's so important is because actually, I think, usually what I see is that designers maybe are better dressed, but engineers often have the best ideas. And it usually really irritates designers because designers love to own the solution space and they're usually really good at that and they're great at customer empathy. But engineers often think of things that they have a different perspective and they have a different way of looking at things. And they're often able to say, I can see what you're trying to achieve there, but what if we just changed it in this tiny way? It'll be a lot easier for us to deliver and maybe we can achieve an outcome that we didn't think was possible by using some technology that you haven't thought about or you weren't aware of. And so this collaboration between designers and engineers and business people becomes super important in finding the solution that works. So what does that look like in a team? This is one way to do it. So this is another visual management wall. This is a product wall. And you can see, again, it starts with the customer. So what are we trying to achieve for our customers? How can we translate that into an actionable strategy framed as a set of hypotheses and beliefs? How can we use prototyping and experiments to learn which of our hypotheses are looking like they will succeed and which aren't, and how we can use that to help us to adapt our strategy? And then importantly, what does that mean from how we're going to build it, informing the story map of what's involved in building this thing out? What are the most important things? Where do we draw the line on the first version that we want to put into market? And then continuously learning through data and feedback and continuously refining that strategy. So probably behind this wall, there's a development team and a Jira board and a whole bunch of requirements and other things going on. But this is the one place that the entire team, all the way through from designers to engineers to service design people to business executives, can come together and say, why are we coming to work? And what are we doing? And how are we going on our mission to succeed, to deliver some value for a customer? Another thing that I think we see all the time is this idea of learning your way to better practices. So there's a lot of conversation at the moment about digital transformation and ways of working and bringing together the different mindsets. And when I think about how design thinking, lean and agile come together in an organization, maybe it's something like this. And this is certainly not the one process model to rule them all that is how it works in every organization, absolutely not. But it starts to say, how does design thinking and agile work together to achieve something for an organization? What about lean and design thinking? How does that work for customer empathy and strategy and how we frame things and so on? But what I often see is teams that try to do all of this at once. And usually it's called the digital transformation. And when you try to change so many things at once, often things break. And so maybe they ask, maybe they invite some more experienced, more expensive consultants to come, and they call it digital transformation 2. And then that one fails, and they say, we must be doing something wrong. Let's get the more expensive consultants in. We'll have another go, and it's number 3. But actually, it's not the aptitude of the people. Often, it's the people inside the organizations know how to do this work. They're intelligent, smart people. It's not that you need more expensive, more intelligent, more smart consultants. I believe it's that you need to take Mike Rother's way of thinking, the improvement kata, and just do one thing at a time. Pick the one thing that you want to change about your organization and try something and see if it works. Learn from what you did, refine it until you're happy with where you're at, then try something else instead of trying to do an all-encompassing full transformation. So a couple of key takeaways from what we've talked about today, and then we can have some questions. Make purpose clear. It's really obvious. Visual management's a really great way to do it. Get people around, make strategy and vision and direction a democratic activity. Creating the conditions for autonomy. So having clear outcomes and constructing teams in a way that lets the people closest to the work figure out the best way to achieve it is a really important thing to do. And I think this is kind of modern leadership. I don't want to say it's easy, it certainly isn't, but I think it's worth pursuing because predicting and controlling, I don't see that working very often. Being adaptive, not predictive. How can we continuously refine our strategy through the things that we learn? How do we get better at measuring the things that help us to make decisions? Try things. And then from your observations and what you've learned, use that to make your decisions and refine that strategy. Embrace many mindsets in one team. And importantly, change one thing at a time. Thanks so much.